Hello and welcome to Dev Game Club, a weekly podcast in which two veteran game developers look at games from the past and talk about their impact and relevance today. I'm Tim Longo Jr., and I'm joined, as always, by a man who didn't know he needed a second job until he got to New Yokosuka Harbor.
Brett Duville. How was I going to get money together for Hong Kong after I lost it on an ill-fated ticket purchase?
The irony, though, the irony is that we don't have the job for the money. It's just to infiltrate the Mad Angels, right? I mean, it really wasn't for the cash, is my memory.
Well,
because you don't end up buying a ticket.
No, you don't. Although it's the game is so we're talking about Shenmue, of course. We're finishing that discussion off this week.
Oh, we're finishing it.
We're finishing it, even if Suzuki doesn't. Zing. So my recollection was, okay, we lost all this money. We as Rio lost all this money. We didn't have enough money to go. But we were at least going to try to get more information about what happened with Londi and where he is and all that stuff if he hasn't left. We think he's gone to Hong Kong. So it's sort of both.
Well, yeah, but I mean, there's a point when, I forget who it was who tells you, but who was it? Somebody tells you...
Must be Chen.
Might have been Chen. It might have even been Goro. I don't remember. But somebody says you need, he wants to know what's going on, where Londi is, etc. And you find a name or something, and they're like, well, if you want more information, you need to talk to the Mad Angels. And you're like, who are the Mad Angels? And someone says, well, they run the docks, but if you want to find them, you have to get a job because they harass the newbies, and then that will, you'll find them.
So you're trying to draw their attention.
Yeah, you're trying to get
so
them
for
to
me, this
harass
happened a while back because
right.
I had gotten to this point before break, and you had not. So yes, it's a little fresher in your mind. That's right. that there was some. You basically need to draw their attention so you can get more information, I guess. Yeah. It doesn't really explain how that will help you pursue Londi, but maybe just knowing more, I guess.
The connection of them.
Knowing's half the battle.
Yeah, it is. And I wish I knew more about this game and story. But of course, the thing that we're dancing around with this specific Yokosuka Harbor thing is the forklift section, which so I forget exactly where we had intended to stop last time. Had you also done that portion last time, or was that
no last time I basically got to the point where I could go to the harbor and get the job.
Mm-hmm.
We had done the stealth section, right? We had both done the stealth section. Yeah. And I had gotten to the point where I was being told, go to this warehouse to get a job.
Okay.
So that was, I think, basically where I'd let off. Although I didn't know, yes. And so that would have been what had led me to knowing that. Like, I have to get information about this gang, which is certainly the whole point of it. But it is a really weird section. Broadly speaking, we're in the section of the game where we need to get information about this gang. We have acquired a job which we are going to meticulously pursue, and I'm sure we'll talk about that. It also takes away all the sort of free roaming parts of the game, except on the docks. So you've basically moved on from Dobuita. Dobuita. You've moved on from that to focusing essentially entirely on the docks. In fact, if you try to leave the docks before you've advanced the story at that point, he says something like, "I should look around more," or things along those lines. And you don't have to fast travel or make your way there, except in one notable instance. So that's kind of what's been going on.
Well, then the even crazier thing about that section structurally is, yeah, you don't have the free roaming sections of the rest of the towns / city, whatever it is. But then also once you're there, you can't free roam unless you're on your lunch break or after you're off work. So you're locked into the forklift to the job. And then some, that is their device or conduit for triggering scenes to happen each day that you work, because you're getting closer and closer to the Mad Angels by working, I guess, and then
just by being around,
being a new guy, and then of course you kick their butt each time, which makes them more and more angry, and then eventually you find what you need. But I just am amazed at the commitment to the fork. I had always heard, I think I said this in the last episode, I had always heard about the forklift stuff in this game.
Right.
But I don't think I really ever fully processed like what people were saying or people were being vague, because it is way more elaborate and just full committed to than I had thought it would be.
Yes. So do you want to describe a little bit about the life of a forklift operator on the docks in New Yokosuka Harbor?
Yeah. Like you said, at least they spare us the pain in the butt to just get to work. They just get us there immediately, which is nice. You just leave the house and you're already coming off the bus. But the first thing that happens for a forklift driver is you race. Every morning. You arrive early. You arrive early, so Mark, who is your foreman or whomever, your boss, can host a race for all of you to warm up. I think he literally says, "It's time to warm up." And so you race around the harbor, all the container areas and such, warehouse district. 3 laps and you try to do your best. And then after that, you are assigned a section of the warehouse area and you were given a map with a quota. And so you need to look at that map, figure out where you need to take, you're given your forklift. Once you're in your forklift, you can't leave. You're committed until lunch, which is a 2-hour break, by the way. You have to move crates from point A to point B each day. It's a different route in different warehouses, or you come back to similar warehouse, but it's a different route. And you try to fill your quota. If you fill your quota each day, you get a raise. And so the next day's wages, you get paid per crate, will be $50 more. So, you go from like $300 a crate if you get your quota each of the days you play the game. I got up to like $400 a crate or something, or maybe higher.
No, it's probably 500.
Yeah, 500. So anyway, it's like whatever, 6 days then or something. Yeah. So
and it's yen.
Yen. Sorry. Yes.
Correct. So more like a penny, I think, than a dollar.
Right. Yes.
Right.
And so. Yeah, so you're basically doing, as fast as you can. You're moving these crates, and the forklift is, it's a regular vehicle, and you can raise and lower the forklift section, forklift, whatever it's called, itself to 2 different levels, and so
the fork
of the
forklift that you lift.
Yeah. Okay, all right. I'm sure there's that's probably what it's called. And so you can stack them, right? And you need to put them in specific places in each warehouse once you get them there. And they throw one, like the last day, they throw you for a loop by having you take 2 sets of boxes to, two different places. And so you have to kind of organize a little bit. But if you want to do the quota, I didn't try to see what would happen if you didn't do the quota, or if you just like did one or something. So I don't know if there's sort of alternate routes there, but if you do commit to for the from essentially whatever 9 or 10 in the morning to noon, and then from 2 o'clock to 5 o'clock, I was forklifting the whole time as fast as I could.
As was I.
And so you just get into this kind of mundane routine of a dock worker while you're waiting for these scenes to happen. I just could not believe it.
Yeah, and we'll get to the scenes. The scenes can interrupt your day in a few cases, but in most of the cases, they sort of happen after work. You wander around the docks until 9 o'clock or so, and then something will happen. So a couple things about this. One is you were better at forklift racing than I was, apparently, because I never got to number one. The collision always tripped me up. I'd go to pass on the inside, in some corner, and the guy would ram me into it, and I'd get stuck, and I'd lose 2 places. So I never ended up winning a race. The thing that's the most strange to me about this whole section is how it was an open world up until this point, and then how it just totally abandons being an open world. Because in an open world, normally when you have these sort of different sorts of experiences, activities, like forklift racing, if there has ever been another open world game with forklift racing, they usually opt in. Like, oh, I'll go do some forklift races today. Even if they're scheduled, it's more like, oh, I'll make this choice to go do this thing today. Or I'll go work today. I'm playing Persona 5, and I wouldn't call it an open world game, but you do have some freedom in what you do with your protagonist after school often, and some days you might choose to go to work or go to a movie or whatever. But you're making this choice that you're going to do this thing. And here it's just, no, you've reached the part of the story where it's just gonna take this much time to finish X. It's literally at that point there are basically no more choices, it's just a strange choice. I almost wonder if this was the point at which an executive somewhere was looking at his watch and calendar and talking to Suzuki-san and saying, you want to wrap this up? And Suzuki-san saying, but we haven't even explained what Shenmue means.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I would bet that they would not have considered, well, we didn't really quite know what an open world game was at the time. I don't think they set out to make an open world game. And I wonder if they would even call themselves an open world game, even now.
Yeah, fair enough.
You know what I mean? But I agree with you that it is such a weird, like from a kind of, I don't want to, like, I'm not trying to throw shade, but like from a logical perspective, it does feel like something that would be more opt-in, even in the structure of the game that we have up to this point. But I think what we'll talk a lot about in this episode is basically from that sequence onward, basically does become sort of this very directed, march to the end in various ways. It's just sort of like set piece or scene or beat after beat, just in sort of an order, right? And then you just kind of have to ride it out. And after you get fired from your job because you're such a troublemaker, it becomes that even more so, because there aren't even any wandering around sections, even at lunchtime. So, right. Yeah. And the interesting thing about the structure for me with the lunch and the evenings, because there wasn't, I think we talked about this quite a bit, and this is sort of like a lesson learned for me on kind of the what not to do, which we've talked about from time to time on playing various games. The rule set was just so inconsistent in this game, especially in this section, in that when it comes to like progressing the story forward, because I wasn't sure, the only indication you really had if you were done with the harbor for the day / night is to kind of try to exit to see what he would say. Mm-hmm. So it's like, I'm not sure during lunch, I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do or how much I need to do. So I would just kind of run around, wander around, talk to as many people as I can, and maybe I get something. But There wasn't really much to go on. And then at night, it was somewhat the same. More happened at night, but it wasn't even a guarantee, it felt like sometimes. Some of the stuff I found that night I think was optional. So that wasn't consistent. So it was just sort of like It was sort of the worst version of wandering around, because you had these small sections of time that you could wander around, but without kind of much guidance. Literally, one of the notes in the notebook at the end of that section, do you remember where it just said, "You should talk to everybody," or no, it said you should check in with everybody. That was the note.
Oh, right. Yes, I remember that one. Yes.
After you finished, I was like, "What? Yeah. Everybody?"
Right. What does that mean? Yes, it's so strange. So there's a lot. Yes, there's a lot going on. I mean, the other thing is that there were a fair number of, I don't know if they're clues or whatever, but there are suggestions of what you should be doing that really you can't follow up during lunchtime. And even at night, they don't seem to have anything to do with anything. Yeah. For example, you know, the hideout behind Warehouse 17, rather obviously painted with mad angels and a giant thing of graffiti on it. I wonder where those guys hang out. But you can never go there until one particular point. So it's weird because you know about that place long before then, and I'm sure you could find it on the first day if you went looking. It's just strange. You know, I ended up spending time talking to Mark. I heard more about Mark and his brother, who got some concrete shoes from the Mad Angels, maybe. And Rio going, concrete boots?
Yeah.
They're just so strange. It's a very surreal section. I take your point that, yes, this is probably more an adventure game, really, than it is a open world game. It is strange to me how you basically get up in the morning, you hit the alarm clock, you go to work, and you come home afterwards. I guess you could maybe wander around a little bit in town afterwards. But yes, being in the march of how this is going to go at this point is just wild. After what it's been like before, which is, I mean, I guess often you were just kind of wandering around talking to people, hoping to get some note that was going to tell you what you should be doing next. So I guess it's sort of similar to that, except you're just walking around in a different location and there are sort of fewer people to talk to.
Yeah. I think that's clearly why this game is such a genre bending game for the medium anyway. And it's probably why we're playing it, right? Because we are struggling with how, you know, and I'm sure they did too. They were making this thing that they wanted to make, that he wanted to make, or whatever, and it's sort of like it's many pieces put together, you know, rather than which is similar to an adventure game in some ways, right? It's a series of scenes with discrete sort of solutions and things like that, and the better ones are really well put together and interconnected, but I don't know. It just would be so interesting to see how sort of a day-to-day, week-to-week development would have been for this game, you know, because I feel like it was very much built on, obviously the story is driving most everything. It felt like, and it was built on sort of like the set pieces or the sequences that they wanted at the time. And everything seemed so, for the most part, fairly custom. But still there was this interesting sense of living in the world for most of it. Even I would say, and I'm trying to sort of look at the other side of the forklifting for me, there was a point, and this is going to sound super silly, where I really felt like I was doing it. You know, like I was a forklift driver in that world. And the small example I have that came to me at one point, and I know I'm totally overthinking this and over talking this because it's ridiculous to some degree. But when you first arrive at the warehouse at the docks, you see forklift drivers driving around, right? And they're going in and they're carrying stuff around, and you know from the rest of the game that they're probably on a route and they're probably very consistently scripted that way. So you're like, oh, wow, look, those guys are making it happen. They're doing it. And then you become one of those guys and you're on your route, you know? And so you kind of become a part of the machine in a way. And, you know, I had 1 or 2 days where I've cleared the whole set of crates, and it felt pretty good, you know?
Yeah.
And it was a weird moment where I was like, I can't believe I'm doing this. I don't want to be doing this. If I was not playing this for the podcast, I probably would have put it down here. But I did get into that sort of mental groove, and felt the mundane aspects of the world.
It made me think of Ian Bogo's Play Anything, where he describes diving into a task, mundane, anything, so much that it becomes in itself play, that when you get to know something so super well that you can start evaluating it according to whatever metrics you come up with as you do that mundane thing again and again, just naturally becomes play. And it sort of felt that way. I found myself keeping track of how well I lined up the forklifts so that I would know how I would be able to put the thing in the grid. Like, oh, I left the weight a little bit over to the right of center, say. So I'm going to have to make sure to come in a little bit on the left into the grid so that I can do that. Or how quickly can I back up and turn around and get out so I can go and pick up the next crate? And certainly, can I make quota and things like that? So I found myself being playful in it, and optimizing like a proper video game player, I guess, but also just having some fun with that. With just, I've done mundane tasks in the past, and you find like, oh, I wonder if I can, how many I can do in a minute or whatever. I mean, there are definitely times where I was like, wow, I did that one in a perfect amount of time, but I don't know. Am I going to make quota? Am I going to fill the grid out today, et cetera? And just, so there is that. It also does feel like having a job for the first time, having responsibility for the first time, where you have to go to a wage job, and it is just a routine. You get up, you go to the job, you come home, you take a shower, go to bed, or whatever. So there was that aspect of it too.
Yeah, it just felt. I mean, going back to elaborate a little bit on what I was saying earlier, and I'd agree with what you're saying, that you do get into that point where it becomes part of play, even though when you describe it to somebody, I think verbally, and this was sort of my experience back in the day when the game came out and people were describing the game to me, you hear them talk about the forklift section and you can't believe that it's in there, because you're like, what? You're what? What are you doing? And then, but the aspect, the thing that I didn't feel until the forklift section as much as the forklift section is being a part of the world, because when you're walking around town in the different towns and you talk to people, a lot of them they refer to you by name, and clearly people know you because you've grown up here, right? And you're, some of the older characters will, talk about you as a kid even. And so you build this relationship with them, but, they're talking about a time that you didn't play. There's the history of him in the town is something you didn't really experience. You've been only experiencing up to the point of this story. And why it's important, going back to, I think, some of the theater stuff I was talking about early on. So you don't have that history as a player, right? The character does, and that's a common, interesting sort of challenge with games versus movies or films or something, is that you're so inhabiting the character that sort of the history isn't there for you because you didn't live it as the player. But when you get to the forklift section, like I said, not only are you a part of the clockwork of the warehouse district now, but the other cool thing that I loved, that I felt even more of a connection to for whatever reason than I did with some of the shopkeepers, that I probably only talked to the minimum that I needed to progress. I didn't really live in the world as much as I probably should have, as he wanted me to, or they wanted me to. But because you race the same guys every morning and you have lunch with the same guys every day, they're the ones all sitting on that row. They're the same ones. They have names. Yep. You can go talk to them, after they finish their lunch and stuff too. And so I got to know those guys, and they didn't have elaborate backstories or stuff, but sometimes they would give me a little bit of extra detail. But you kind of become part of the machine, like I said, and that was the first time that I felt like that, despite whether I liked doing it or not. I thought that was something that I don't feel like I get, very often in games. You're either the sort of uber hero, and the avatar, the special one, the chosen one that everyone needs, or you're the every person, or you know what I mean? Like,
right, yeah.
But here you're just kind of like, you're just part of the workforce. You're part of the machine. And that is a pretty rare, interesting thing, bold. And also it's probably rare for good reason. You know, you see
right.
why it's rare. And then I was mentioning to Brett,
it's hard to see this as escapist fiction, right?
Let
me escape from my day job at the warehouse by going to my day job on the docks.
Yeah. Oh, but you could not have teed up my next point better with that segue. I was telling Brett in pre-show that I started finally playing Death Stranding. And by total accident, just from a timing perspective, and I'm only a couple hours in, but there's more in common than I would have ever thought when it comes to sort of how do you put mundane things, you know, into a video game sort of context. And your point about Ian's book was even more appropriate for Death Stranding, because it is very much, at least so far, I don't know where the game goes after this, but at least so far, it is taking mundane tasks and turning it into playful, you know, mechanical and systemically driven, you know, interactions. And it's very fascinating to me. But then the one big difference with Death Stranding versus Shenmue, for the most part, Shenmue has some sort of mystery around it with the story and stuff, but it's set in this very mysterious and weird world, right? So even though you're doing mundane tasks, you're still curious about like what is going on with this place, you know, and these weird characters and stuff. But there's definitely just more in common with the two of them than I would have thought.
Yes, I mean, I do think that we don't get walking. I wonder if we get back to Death Stranding from walking simulators from this, right?
Yeah.
That's not a direct route. It feels like it went away to sort of more walking simulators where there isn't a lot of actual of this sort of activity, this sort of focused activity necessarily. I don't know. I'm not a super expert in walking sims, though I've worked on one.
But you know, they're not typically. They don't have like rich mechanical sections and things.
Right. Yeah. Typically, you're not finding you might have mechanics in it that have more to do with examining the world and learning more about the world in different ways, and then just sort of moving on. And there aren't sort of there's certainly you don't expect to have forklift races, and then to come back, sort of take that into. Whatever Death Stranding is, and sort of action adventure game, I guess, closer context is very strange.
So far for me, I would call it a walking simulator.
Yeah.
And I know it's apparently it does expand from there. And obviously I don't want to spoil anything for people that haven't played it or whatever, but yeah, it's very simple in that regard, and I can see it getting more elaborate. Not simple, like there's some interesting mechanical things going on, but it's definitely, I don't know. He seems to be vocal about how he feels like he's trying to create a new genre with this game. So I'm keeping an eye on that, but so far I don't see what he means by that.
Yeah, I don't. I see elements of lots of different games, including this one, in that, from what I've seen. And it's not a game I'll probably get around to anytime soon. I still have MGS4 and Revengeance and Ground Zeroes and V to do before I get to Death Stranding. So I've got a lot of Metal Gear.
Well, I don't know if you need to play those before you play this, but yeah, I feel you.
No, that's my defense against having to play it. So
okay. Well, there was a moment when I was about to suggest we play it as a bonus episode.
Oh my goodness!
Because it was unexpectedly similar, you know, in some of the conversations we're having about. Because really, you're just like, it's not forklift driving, but you're basically just delivering things, right? Like that's all right. I've done. And there are some mechanics and systems happening there, but it's very much like A to B, you know, with some crazy drama and melodrama around it, you know.
Right.
So anyway, but I retract my suggestion. We don't have to do that for your.
Yeah,
for your
I'm not sure. I'm not sure it's for me. Let's talk about the other sort of things that are going on. We've already mentioned that there's sort of increasing fighting going on. I did have a scene with Nozomi, the details of which are already escaping me. But I did have a scene with her maybe a couple days after Christmas. I guess she came to tell me she was going to Canada. Did you have that happen?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. I had somebody on the stream say they hadn't seen that before because they finished quicker than that. So it seems like there might be a more drawn-out schedule. Tom goes to the U.S. as well, the hot dog salesman. So I thought that was interesting that there were a couple things that happened that didn't have to happen to me, and I had no idea that was a thing that felt like it just fit in with everything else that was going on as far as on the docks go. I mean, we both took 10 or 11 days or whatever to stealth our way through the docks to get to warehouse number 8 or whatever it was back before break. But anyway.
Well, the wedding with Goro and Mai must also be a time-based thing.
Oh, maybe you
I
can
didn't think about the calendar part of it, but yeah, that must be how some of those optional events happen. It's on some sort of schedule. So then I'm like, what did we miss?
Right. How much other stuff is there? But the sort of the whole thing kind of comes to a head when they kidnap Nozomi and you have to get to the docks in time. That was just the funniest section to me. I just couldn't stop laughing because it was so I'd literally said to myself, I don't even think the bus goes there anymore. What am I going to do? And then I ran down to the bus stop and he goes, I can't get there. The bus is not running. Yeah. And I have to, and then I was like, and I'm like, well, where am I going to, I could get a motorcycle from the shop. So I made, and then of course that didn't work, but he told you, it just, it was very funny though, how well connected my brain was to what the systems or what the schedule of this place is at that point. Like, I've got to get to the docks. Oh no. Of course, then I was like, I don't even know how to get there because I only ever ride the bus and they don't show you.
Well, but you went over a small point that I think is pretty important for me there with you immediately, and so did I, it sounds like, thought of the motorcycle shop.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Even though it was midnight or something. And I think that is another example for me of this sort of like completely living in this world, right? We've run by and probably talked to that dude many times. We know that it's there, and we're in that section of town and we think to ourselves, wait, what? Now, of course, there's bicycles everywhere. There's all sorts of there's other things around, but you think to yourself, because we know the place, right? We've become more familiar. And so the first thing I did was run over there.
Right.
And then he leads you to the next one and you're like, oh, Ito, I remember Ito in that other town. You don't remember the bike, of course, but probably there's something that we probably missed where that guy's bike was. I wouldn't be surprised if that guy's bike was being worked on at some point previous, or it was on a schedule and that friend of yours, had his bike at some point visible. But I thought that was a cool, So continue though.
I did. I really liked that I sort of went through all the steps in my head, basically without the game having to tell me, and just even to the point of being like, how am I going to get there? There's no bus at this time, I don't think, because I had looked at the bus schedule. So then it goes to a motorcycle sequence, which really was surprising. That is not a thing I expected. First of all, it's funny because Ito says, don't drive too fast or something like that. But of course, that's the only way to get through the next section. So it's kind of a weird, ironic thing for him to say in the context of the game, because you literally have to speed through the town. There's a very tight sequence to get through. I failed it once as well. I didn't ask if you had appreciate how you do that. Yeah. So you have to zoom through that. I didn't even realize there's a timer going on the screen. I didn't even recognize it as a timer initially because I looked up and it was like, oh, it's 2:00. Because it was like a 2-minute timer. but then I immediately looked down to steer and lost track of the fact that it was counting down. And then it started beeping when I was so close to. I'm like, oh, are you kidding me? I've never done this before in the game, and now I have to do it on a timer, and I don't know how far I'm going. I mean, just like, what is that section?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, this is a wacky to inject that in there. And I think that what we mentioned this a little bit earlier, but what you're about to get to just in general is the breakneck pace to the end of the game, right? Because I think that this is a perfect example of what we said earlier of things being triggered in a linear sort of way. Once you finish the forklift stuff, it's like it's scene upon scene or sequence upon sequence of some kind that is kind of a one-way ticket. You're not going back. Not only that, but there's fewer locations to save the game, which was frustrating for me too, so there were times when you just had to like hunker down and make it happen. That was one of them. And then, the fighting stuff that's coming up was another one.
Right. So I guess that the motorcycle sequence happens. That's a fairly involved fight where you're at the headquarters behind the Warehouse 17, where they've all been hanging out. That's finally open, only for this scene, as far as I know. And eventually you get to that. I think there might be one more day, basically, of work, and then you get to literally the last few things that happen in the game. One of which is just an extraordinarily protracted fight. I guess,
don't forget the motorcycle ride home, though.
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. The music video. Motorcycle. That's right.
But, love song plays, and that was it. It was sort of like, and longer than it needed to be, but this game, when it comes to committing to its creative choices, is just astounding. But anyway, so then that's very much, that reminds me of like a John Woo movie that will take the time to have a sequence where two characters are being established as having some sort of relationship. And I guess this one's sort of bittersweet because you're never going to see her again after this, basically. Although you don't maybe know that at the time. I don't remember when she said she was going to Canada versus that scene for me. You have that one, isn't there a dream, like a flashback sequence where you don't see her obviously directly, but when does that flashback scene play where they are at the temple and they talk about it's right at the end. Anyway, we'll get there, but you're getting on the boat.
Right.
Or at least this happened for me. You're getting on the boat and then he stops and then you get a white fade. And then it's like this scene with Nozomi at the temple and she's saying how she doesn't want time to stop or just she wants time to stand still. Anyway. Yeah. But then, but you get to the headquarters, after you get home. What brings us to, that's right. To get Nozomi, Terry, the best name for a villain of all time.
Terry says you have to beat up Gui Zhang.
Yeah.
Or they'll go after Nozomi again, basically, right?
So then you come back to the warehouse the next day to intercept him on his way home from work, and you fight him, and then you kind of team up eventually, and then you end up fighting everybody else, but that leads to the protracted. So now you're at the protracted. Go for it.
Right, the protracted fight scene. So this fight scene for me, I thought for sure that you were going to have more trouble with this than I did.
I thought for sure.
Well, and we'll talk about why you didn't, because I think you actually did some things that I didn't do. So you and Gui Zhang go through just bad guy after bad guy. I found some attack that I ended up just doing again and again and again, which is like a shift forward and press. Let's see, what would that be? Kick and punch, maybe. But it was basically almost like a Hadouken move, where he puts both hands out, kind of stomps and pushes both hands out. And it was
that's the one I was talking about. It's called the double blow.
Okay, yes. I nobody taught me that. I was just doing it. I just kind of found it.
Oh,
So
interesting. Okay.
just while I was doing this this battle for the second time, I had that. So you have basically this lots of just random, gang members who are, if you're using some of these advanced moves, I guess, are basically one hit kills if you pull off the moves. Otherwise, they're 2 hits. So they're just meant to be fodder and to give you the sense that this is some big deal. The whole gang's coming after you. It's sort of like a Jackie Chan movie or something like that, where you've just got this sequence of random goons who you're going to just beat up one after the other, or like that scene in Old Boy was the other sort of thing I referenced at the time. Just one after the other. And then towards the end of that, there's first a guy who comes out with a board who's going to attack you, and then another guy who's just bigger than everybody else. I mean, it is very action movie sort of setup. Like, oh, this guy's he's clearly bigger, and he's definitely tougher. And I ended up getting to him. It took me 3 tries to defeat that guy. And if you fail, even at that point where you've gone all the way through all of this, you have to go through all of it again. And that is not good. I'm just going to go ahead and put that out there. That is a poor choice. There is no more drama at that point.
No.
It is such a weird thing with games, especially boss fights, of you end up failing and you have to do a bunch of things again, and it just sucks the life out of the dramatic aspect of the scene. I would have felt so triumphant if I did it the first time, which you did. So why don't you tell me your experience?
Well, and I think one of my meta points that I'll get to a little bit more in our takeaways section for the end relates to what you were just saying, in that I think the type of game that this was shines a light on those dramatic breaks, because it is a game that is sort of this interactive cinema, right? Anytime you have some of those failure points, it breaks down. Where I think that games are not, when games are not as focused on that, right? You're a little more forgiving with sort of some of those retries, and things. But anyway, yeah. So for me, I don't even remember why. For whatever reason, I started getting into the movement system. And I literally, I would go, if I was at the docks, I would go to warehouse number 4 and train every day until he didn't want to train anymore. Right. And what I was doing was I was focusing on a couple specific moves that I felt like were easy enough for me to repeat successfully and seemed to do a lot of damage. And so every day I would go in and train. And if you're in certain, like, I think it's a park, I didn't train as much in other sections, but I think there's a park in one of those areas, or maybe 2 of the areas are a park, actually. Yes. And then there's the dojo, which I would use quite a bit too. So the strong attacks of Big Wheel and the one you were using, Double Blow, which I did learn from an old man at some point in the park. I basically, when I would go to sleep at night, I would make sure that I focused on Big Wheel. So that was the only one that I was training up while I was sleeping, whatever that means. And then when I would go and train in areas, I would just use those, which it seems to be skill-based progression training there. So the more you use it, the more you the bar goes up. And so by the time I got to that battle, my Big Wheel bar was almost all the way full. My Double Blow was pretty good. And the Big Wheel is sort of this fist pound that kind of comes over your head and then pounds in front of you. So you actually commit quite a bit to it. And I think you're pretty vulnerable. But if you land it, it pretty much knocks a guy down sometimes in one hit, or at least knocks them back. And so it does take some timing. And then that combined with, I started to get pretty into, which I'm sure you did too, the just dodging, right, and evading.
Yeah.
And then waiting for my green, the green balls to fill back up. So the key for me for fights, because I also, I don't think I fail the fight for the rest of the game there. is just to sort of be cautious and wait for the bars to go back up.
Right.
Fill
To
back
be
up,
more
and
patient. I mean, that ended up being what was my successful approach, especially as I knew I was getting to that guy the third time, was just, I should use the opportunity here with some of the cannon fodder to just recover some of the health I lost to the guy with the board, because that guy had a lot of reach. And just sort of make sure I took my time with them and dodge a lot, don't take any hits. And even with him, just keep dodging, dodge until I can land a hit, and then maybe dodge away some more. And ultimately, so I just sort of whittled him down. I'm not crazy about the lack of feedback on how much health they have left.
No.
I think it's a strange...
It's kind of, they went halfway in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
It feels like they could have,
it feels like Virtua Fighter to some degree.
Mm-hmm.
You're not fighting on a plane, right? You can move side to side, which is very effective for dodging. But yeah, I didn't do it.
No good though. Like there's a lot of aspects that.
Yeah.
That's what I mean by it felt like they went halfway, is that, because they have Virtua Fighter in their own lineage. And so you could see where they're pulling from, but then they left sort of key elements of a fighting game out. So it's like, you didn't quite finish that stuff.
Yeah. There would be times where it's just me in that fight in particular. It's just me and him, and I'd end up facing away. And I'm like, why am I facing away? That would happen a lot in the fights with multiple people, and I sort of would let that go, because it's like, okay, it's confused, or it's because there's all these people, it's part of the skill to focus on them. But when it's just me and this one guy who's turning out to be difficult for me, I've definitely felt the frustration of not being locked on to him. And then that happened again with Gollum, which is not his actual name. Yeah, Chai, at the very end. Yeah, something like that. So I guess we should finish off that bit before we move on to Master Chai. But basically, you get to Terry. You go straight from this fight with the tall guy in green, or some of his costume is green anyway.
He has orange chaps on. You're talking about that guy?
Yeah, the chaps, right? Yes, he had the green vest and the orange chaps. And you, very strange. I just want to have an aside here. Like, is this what gangs are like in China? I mean, in Japan? Like, is this what they were like in the 80s? Everybody dresses in weird...
I got to hand it to you. The 80s were weird all over. So,
I don't know, man. That's just like it is like a Jackie Chan movie or something where.
Yeah, I think it's a Hong Kong flick in a lot of ways, and
right. You need like these color changes in order just to be able to track what's going on the screen. I guess is some of what's going on is that, I don't know. It's some way to try to make these characters stand out a little bit as individuals rather than the cannon fodder that they effectively are.
Yeah.
So that's just kind of funny. Like, there's a couple guys who wear the 88 vests or hoodies, I guess, in the red. And they show up a couple different times. Like, and I already beat these guys up. They're coming back for more. There's one guy with a talking part. It's just very strange. It's like they're members of one of the Coney Island, or one of the gangs of New York and the Warriors. Right. It's so strange. But anyway, then you go to confront Terry, which starts with a quick time event, which I also then failed because I thought I was in a cutscene at that point. And then I'm like, oh no, I think I even put the controller down. Why don't you take it from there? What happens with Terry?
Well, shoot, I don't remember the specifics of you get his weapon away from him, but you're basically trying to help what's his name? Shen's son.
Gui Zhang.
Gui Zhang, yeah. Because he says that, he's going to be the one to beat up Terry. But then the funny thing about the conclusion of that whole sequence is ultimately Terry tells you that Lan Di is gone. So it's almost like it was for nothing. Like it was like you beat him, and he's like, well, yeah, he's already left. The little golem guy took him to the ship. So it's sort of, it was very like anticlimactic in that way. But I don't remember
this whole thing about the Lao Ji, which is never really resolved. I didn't really follow all of that. I mean, there was more about it later. It was mentioned, but I just kind of just went in one ear and out the other. It was so many
trade routes and competition with Chen and his stuff and drug dealing, drug running and stuff like that, and sort of the sort of black and gray market trade to Hong Kong. It sounded like was sort of like what was. So there must be some cultural stuff there that we may not understand, but that they assume that we would know. Maybe I don't know. But then I forget if a day happens after that or not, or if you go directly to talking to Chen and his son, and then sort of like you basically figure out, okay, Landi's gone. He's already on a ship. There's no way I'm going to get to Hong Kong. What am I going to do? And then Chen offers to essentially help you out and get you, on this boat. And his son was going to originally go with you, but then of course, you had to have some sort of final battle with with whatever his name is, Master Chai or something like that, the golem kind of guy. And so he ends up being the final boss battle, which I didn't see coming because I thought we were going to go to Hong Kong in this game. and the son gets injured, so he ends up not going with you at the end. But yeah, the fight with so he kind of appears out of nowhere and wants to stop you. And that fight was definitely rough. I didn't end up failing, but I came very close a couple times. And I just used the same tactics I said before, using those couple moves and just being very cautious and staying away from him and trying to keep my bar full, but he was, the interesting thing about him, which I loved, and even the guy with the chaps, is they start utilizing a lot more of those more interesting moves that they have in the system. So they're doing things in pretty cool ways that look like almost like, you're being fought by another player. Right. You know what I mean? Like it felt like a fight in that way, or like a more advanced AI.
Right. For example, the big guy ended up picking me up and putting me over the back of his neck, and then doing throwing me to the ground and things like that, or throwing me to the ground. And then with Master whatever, with Gollum, in particular, if I tried to grab him, he would grab my hands and use the momentum to slide through my legs.
Yeah.
Which is a really cool move, and I would have liked to see more of that sort of parrot animation stuff in the fighting. So. I think you can do all those moves. The one thing we didn't talk much about, but I'll hit on it here very quickly because there's not much to talk about and we should move on. But the collectability in this game is really interesting to me too. I only found 2 of the move scrolls, but like there's that side. I love that stuff in games, and so there is that side of me that really would have liked to have found more of that stuff. And I realized that one of the mechanics they have with the scrolls is, at least the scrolls that I found were in Chinese, and so you could call Chen at any time and meet his son at the warehouse, and he will read the scrolls for you and give you the move that you found in the scroll. So I thought that was kind of cool. And I don't know, there were probably like 10 or 12 more scrolls that I'd never found. So then I'm like, well, where do you get these scrolls? Like, what are the elaborate things you have to go through to find them? One of them I think I found, like I said, behind one of the pictures at home. But so, that's kind of interesting. I spent a lot of money on the gotchas as well. because I'm me, and I didn't get them all, but I got a couple achievements out of it. But anyway, so it was cool to see that fight with Chai, but I have to say, I didn't feel very clever because, like I said, I just kind of rinsed and repeated what I've done before. Eventually whittled him down, but it was long. It took me a long time, and I was tired by the end. So, for me, it was just a lot of evading and hitting him whenever I could, basically just evade. Oh, I have an opportunity, and try to sneak an attack in. So yeah, it was very strange to have the game end there effectively. I mean, you end on this very high note and basically go straight onto the boat and have, yes, that flashback you mentioned, but he really just is like, I'm turning my back on my childhood, I'm getting on the boat and going off to avenge my father's death. Ta-da. It feels incomplete to me,
with some voiceover narration too. And I wrote down a note when that narration started, that I wrote down the note of just kind of like, what's this narration doing here? They haven't done narration before. That's not a thing in this game. It felt kind of out of place. And then it dawned on me that this was the end, because I thought it was like, that's weird. Why would they do this before, in the
right now?
game?
Yeah.
And then I was like, oh no, this is what they would do at the end of the game when they don't have the ending they want to narrate. I mean, like that, I was trying to find the script so we could read it on air, but I couldn't find it in time. But they talk about like how Ryu is the chosen one and it's his destiny from birth, and like some heavy stuff that I don't think was really alluded to or mentioned anywhere else, at least in stuff that I found. So pretty crazy. Yeah, pretty crazy way to end. But yeah, it basically just felt unfinished. Like they had to kind of close it off somewhere, I guess.
Yeah, I was very surprised at how abruptly it ended. I actually thought it was going to go and establish you a little bit in Hong Kong. I had read something and, to try to figure out how to split this up. I did not expect that to end the way it ended. It's a weird game. It's a weird game.
Shenmue 2. I mean, I do remember people talking about the ending of this one and being, upset or sort of like disappointed at it and stuff. And I can totally see why now.
Yeah, I don't know. It definitely feels. I feel that executives tapping on the calendar and the checkbook. It does not feel like this was the intended place for this game to end. And I don't. I actually should look. I have Shenmue 2 right up here in my browser. So that came out in 2001, whereas the original Shenmue came out, I think we said 99, right? So it was still quite a while. Yeah. Another 21 months, I think, basically, before the sequel came out. It's a weird place to end. Well, we've been going for almost an hour. We should probably take a break and then come back with our takeaways.
Sounds good.
Welcome back from the break. We snuck in a break there, just like I was sneaking in with my attacks on Master Guy, or whatever his name is. So we can keep our takeaways brief. I think the big topics that we've covered have largely illustrated our thoughts on this. Obviously, for us, the big one is sort of this early life simulator / walking simulator sort of thing. It does definitely, in and of itself, I don't know if you'd also just call it a new take on the adventure game would be another way maybe to look at it, like bringing an adventure game into the 3D era or something like that. All different ways to look at it, but I mean that's got to be the obvious one, right?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I didn't know how to how to summarize that per se, but I just put down living world, which is too general and overused as a term. But we talked in the first episode of like simulation has other connotations these days, but they are trying to simulate his life. And, to revisit really quickly that example of how you get the motorcycle, comparing it to other adventure games that would be sort of like in the lineage, a puzzle for that in another game, like a LucasArts game or something, would have a very discrete sort of either, semi-obfuscated, solution. Like you might see him. In fact, I'm sure this happens in Full Throttle at some point where you see a motorcycle and the way you get it is some wacky stuff, but in this case, it's like
you have to get new forks from the junkyard or something.
Right.
Like
exactly. Yeah. So it's very lock and key in that way. But in this case, it's very much simulation based, life simulator based in that, you have to put two and two together to find the solution in that, how the town is laid out. The guy that owns the shop, and you can't knock on his door after hours at any other point in the game, but in that point you can. And that's sort of that's the lock and key of it. And it's the discrete aspect of it, which also is a good and a bad thing because you don't know you can do that per se, but both of us didn't take us long to think about that solution and it ended up being correct. So there's something to be said for them succeeding at creating a world where you're putting two and two together on your own because you were living the life of Ryu. So yeah, that was definitely, I guess I'd always heard that about this game, but I guess I just didn't realize how far they took it, to the degree of seeing certain people, walking their route that they walk every day at the same times. Right. And like you said in one of the episodes, like seeing the stores open at this, certain times and even having to wait, right? Sometimes you needed to go someplace and you needed to wait for the real-time clock, which the real-time clock played a really heavier role in this game than I thought it would have as well. So yeah, kudos to them on that.
I mean, I think it also points to the ways in which that really could have borne some enrichment. A little bit more state inside the characters themselves about their relationship with Rio. And there may be space limitation concerns here because I don't, or even just voice production and what have you. But for example, in this last section, I happened to leave the dock at the same time that Mark got on the bus.
Oh, interesting.
And there was no interaction whatsoever.
Okay.
And it just feels like there's obvious opportunities there for. I mean, it doesn't have to be in a lot of games. That would be a moment that's kind of gamified in some way. Your bond with so and so has grown, right? I mean, that's essentially the basis of a Persona game, for example, is that you do these things with people and something happens. But to have no even acknowledgement, not even a line of "see you for the races in the morning" or just whatever, just something to acknowledge that, oh yeah, I spend all day around this guy, outside of the sort of scripted sequences would have been really nice, would have felt a little more alive. But those are the sorts of things that I think they probably were up against it to get this thing done at all.
Yeah.
And to overlay more of that stuff would have just been more than you could really ask for of the time. Yeah. I did note though at the when I was playing this that I kind of wanted something a little bit more like how the system in Left 4 Dead, in particular Left 4 Dead 2 works, where the characters just comment on things that they see in the environment. There's a whole sort of database and system that's behind that, where they just write lines that are extremely particular to whatever they see in character for the folks. And I would have liked something like that, right? Just something like, oh, I've seen this person that I have this relationship with, I should say something, is basically what I'm looking for there.
Yeah.
Not it doesn't have to be deep, doesn't have to lead into a game system. Very little does in this game. It doesn't have to advance the timeline, just some acknowledgement that these relationships exist. I feel like if I had talked to him, he would have said don't talk to me right now. I'm busy.
Yeah.
Or whatever, you know?
Yeah.
And that's just weird, a weird kind of fallback.
I think at the same time, they were trailblazing to some degree too, and they probably didn't. I mean, I would like to think that maybe in two or three, they start adding some of that stuff in, I would hope. But
I had a passionate defender on the stream of someone saying, "Oh, you're going to play 2 now?" And I'm like, I don't think so.
Well, what about your rabbit hole thing from the
yeah, but I wasn't going down a Shenmue rabbit hole. That one hasn't done it for me.
Yeah, I guess you didn't fall down all of the rabbit holes.
No.
The one thing I'll say really quickly, there is a side of me that's happy that they didn't gamify some of the relationship stuff. I mean, I think exposing it to you is definitely missing. But the few times that I didn't just do the bare minimum of talking to people, just because I was trying to move the story forward, I was rewarded with some interesting, nice little moments. Like there was this one time when I talked to the Army surplus store owner, just randomly as I was walking by, and I didn't have any motivation to do so. I just remember talking to him before, and he told me the story about how he's breaking up with his girlfriend, and he asked me if I could watch the store for him and stuff. And it had nothing to do with anything. And of course, Rio declined and said, "No, I can't help you with that. I'm trying to go catch this master villain." But it was a nice exchange. And then I had another little one with this older woman in one of the smaller towns who told me this story about me as a kid. And so like the few times when I just was running by somebody and decided to hit the A button, there were a couple times when I was kind of, delighted by the exchange, even though it was literally just probably in their data, list of things that could happen. It had nothing to do with anything, but it added to that sort of sense of living in the world. So, yeah. But I had no idea. Right. So the exposure, unless you talk to literally everybody every day, it's, you wouldn't know.
Yeah, I kind of wish, one of the things that's there is the notebook. And there was a case where talking to somebody in the notebook filled in something earlier than where I was in the story.
Yeah, I had the same thing happen.
And that's just
weird.
It's weird. I just don't even know. I'm trying to fit that in. Like, see, my original thinking had been, I love the mechanic of the notebook because even if I don't get everything in it on my first playthrough or whatever, it would at least show me the gaps. And I could, if I was super into the game or whatever, I could go and say, oh, okay, well, here's a good spot. Clearly something was happening around this date that I missed. Maybe I can try to find it on a subsequent playthrough, right? I mean, that's a not uncommon thing to do. To sort of have those things that it's rewarding if you go and, for example, talk to that Army surplus guy or what have you. But when I had an item fill in earlier from a conversation, I went, oh no. So, right, that is not maybe fully supported or well supported. It was just, I don't know if it was logically meant to happen earlier or maybe it could have happened earlier, but it just kind of broke my brain in terms of, so maybe these things could just happen anytime. At which point it was like, I would not try this again.
Well, the thing that I think, I bet you it was the same one for both of us. I think it was when Goro and Mai announced that they were going to get married.
It was.
Yeah, that was added in, and it was put in, back in an earlier portion of the book. And I think what broke my brain on that one is I thought for the most part, anything in the notebook was essentially part of Rio's sort of critical path, like goal with the game. And it was just how much detail are you going to get from the game on that, on his journey. But that particular one was more of just like a side thing that happened. And so now I'm thinking, a lot of those empty spots earlier in the book, those might just be optional side things that have nothing to do with the main story. So then it's like, oh man, so that's like a lot of these little sub threads that could be coming from anywhere. And so you literally do have to talk to everybody to find them. So, I mean, it is natural to want that to be a checklist,
right.
But if it's like the tiniest thing to the biggest thing are listed there, then there's no way to really track it.
Yeah, for sure. Anyway, did you have anything else that
the one that we've over talked, but I'll just hit it home and cement it here. And I summarize this by just calling it interactive cinema. The big takeaway for me on this that I hadn't realized coming into the game is, and that's a silly genre term that we found while doing research before the game, that some people call the genre of this game interactive cinema, which is kind of weird to me, but I know what they mean. But the takeaway for me is how much that, you could see that probably was their goal, because it's very cinematic. It felt like he was kind of wanting to make this movie of sorts at times, that you're playing, and how much that drove so many aspects for both the game and for the industry, QTEs being an example of that, right? Where he wanted interactivity to be in these cinematics and added these button prompts. And thus that was born. At least this is the game that we give credit to creating that. And that was coming from the goal of wanting to make this sort of interactive cinema experience. Other moments, like really even like the motorcycle ride is a similar example, right? Yeah. Where he wanted to have
makes me think of Top Gun, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. He wanted to have that motorcycle moment. He didn't want it to just be a cinematic. So let's just throw this one-off in here, to up the drama. Let's put some timer on it, and frustrate the hell out of people. And then, but it's going to, once they succeed, it's going to feel real dramatic, So, it's just interesting to have that as a macro goal and how it sort of bled its way through the game in weird ways.
Yeah. No, the interactive cinema sort of thing is, and of course that is another lineage that we've talked about on the episodes, is how that gives birth to David Cage's work, for example. So right. It's definitely still got its thread through modern games. And right, I mean, that's basically, the way he approaches it is more just branching, lots of branching and sort of ways to bring those branches back together. I guess there's probably also some, I guess with
he has a lot of QTEs, right?
He has tons of QTEs. And also the thing that he does that is different from here is with Heavy Rain in particular, because I haven't, I played Beyond Two Souls, but just kind of once through quickly, whereas Heavy Rain I kind of dug into a little bit more. In Heavy Rain, the person who is the killer can change depending on events in the game.
Holy really?
I believe that's true. Yeah. So
sorry about that, folks.
Sorry for that. The explicit. Yeah. I could always bleep
it. Let's do a bleep.
Holy Shenmue. So yeah, I think that's true. I remember reading that at the time, and there was a couple scenes that I went back and was replaying, was trying to have a different outcome.
Does he deal with real world clock stuff at all, or is it all just game time relative? Like there's not a days passing.
There's no simulation of days passing. No, I think he drops all of that stuff out. In my recollection, I don't think that's really part of it.
It's not doing the living world part. It's just the cinema part.
Right. And there's maybe one scene in Heavy Rain I can remember where there is a clock on the wall, but I don't know if it advances naturally or if it just advances in response to things that happen in the house, like, I cooked dinner, and it's like your night to have your child. And I think there's this undercurrent of he doesn't know how to be a dad anymore because he lost his other son. Spoilers for Heavy Rain. So there's this element of being disconnected from life, and I think that's meant to reinforce it. And I don't think you can. It's the whole scene is very unhappy and odd and very strange. Something if you ever play that one, I'd love to replay that part of it and talk about it.
Yeah, you want to play it.
There's some weird things about those games.
I do feel like it's a blind spot for me. I would like to play at least Heavy Rain because I feel like that was sort of a turning point for him. But
yeah, but I cast myself back to this time in films, and I can definitely see lots of influences. We mentioned a few this time. I mean, there's an aspect of how this parallels a lot of sort of Hong Kong cinema in terms of how the story goes. So I think that is clearly an influence, and it's interesting. And I wonder to what degree it also maybe reflects something about Suzuki's own life. I mean, whether he had done some sort of wage slave, manual labor type job or something. Like, I don't know if there are elements that he's also pulling in that way. So it might be kind of a personal game in that way. I don't really know.
Yeah,
but certainly.
Well, speaking of the last quick takeaway that I had that we talked a fair amount about in this episode is just the embracing of the mundane in general. I think that there's I think we mentioned a couple examples, but I'm sure there's plenty of examples where we could point to where you see at the time, at least, a big budget game like this coming out on a new console, really heavily supported by Sega, having these sorts of forklift sections, and just the concept of waking up every morning and going to work, or waking up and wandering around town and talking to people, and just the mundane, going to the arcade, and so not that there's games like Shenmue out there in the exact way, but there are elements of games, right, that in certain other high action games where you'll have these mundane moments that you could see potentially being influenced by some of that. So they went to the hilt with it for sure, but I think that there always has been, and we talked about walking simulators, etc. I think there always has been, and there always will be, room for the mundane in games because of the agency the player has. And I think there will always be something interesting to people about that, because both from a pacing perspective, you want that anyway, especially in a high action game. I think it's missing if you don't have something, but because it's interactive as well. The concept that I was moving those crates myself and not watching him do it was a way bigger deal, even though, I don't want to do it again.
Not in any hurry to do that kind of work.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, it's something I've seen in the Persona games. I've been playing some of Persona 5. I'd say there's less of it so far in Persona 5. I'm still only 16 hours in or so. So the game has maybe got more to reveal to me. But certainly in Personas 3 and 4, there's a lot of time where you're just running around town, going to places, to locations, maybe to maybe try to increase your affinity with different characters, and you're just sort of, there's not a lot to that. It's not quite to this level of detail, and there's maybe a wider selection of it as a result. So that's the trade-off they've made. But I appreciate the commitment to that mundanity, and actually just the commitment overall to representing this real world feeling location. I mean, being able to go into a shop and see all of this stuff on the shelves, and buy the raffle ticket for the day, or whatever, or go to the park. And I do feel like there are opportunities for other interactions with characters that I missed, and I don't know that I want to go back and find them, but I do like the feeling that they're there.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. I like the sensation that, and that could be an illusion, right? So that's very successful. It's less successful if I did go back and didn't find it and it's not there, but it works really well on me, who's not going to go back, So there's something to be said for that. I don't know to what degree that's smoke and mirrors, but there's always smoke and mirrors in game development. So.
Well, I'll pull out another quick example that may be stretching it a little bit, but I think crafting in general is a mundane act in most games that have it intentionally. So you get rewarded for crafting to then reinforce the action loop usually, but the act of the crafting part of it, is this sort of this downbeat, down-paced moment for the mundane in the middle of this, right? And it works with survival games and stuff because it feels like it's appropriate and such, but even the other game we're playing right now, right? When you go and craft in WoW, especially WoW Classic, right? You're literally, at least I am, hitting the metal anvil, and over and over again. And it feels like this very slow plotting kind of moment. And then and then I go back out and adventure. So I don't know. I just, this is a game.
Or fishing.
Or fishing. Fishing is actually a better example, I think, in a lot of ways for that.
You throw out the thing, you wait for it to dunk.
Yeah. It's like take a breath.
Just sit there and watch it. There's nothing to do.
Yeah.
It's very funny.
Take a breath. And this is a game all about taking breaths. So that was it. That was my last one.
Yeah, no, I mean, I this is a game that I didn't have tons of takeaways from that weren't covered by you. I do feel like there's maybe some structural problems with the drama, like we talked about, that I would take something away to like make sure you've really got time for the player to kind of come down from that.
For sure.
Those moments, to have something else to do that feels like the thing's resolved. Ending on that tension is very strange. So that's kind of a negative takeaway, but I mean, those are highly valuable too. Sometimes you have to see a misstep to go, oh, okay, yeah, that doesn't work. I should remember to address how I felt in that moment, right? If I work on a game that has a similar arc or something like that. So, but yeah, no, I'm glad to have played it because it's a game that was a huge blind spot for me. I had no real idea what to expect going in. Neither one of us had played it. I remembered people talking about it at the time. Didn't have a Dreamcast, and so by the time it was coming out on other platforms, it was well in my rearview mirror. So kind of cool to look back on it. Okay, well. We have this is a game that has brought in a lot of longer emails. We have I don't know about a lot. We have 3 emails on the longer side. I even edited one of them from you down quite a bit. So I guess we'll go through those because it makes sense to try to get those all done, and then we can catch up with a few other shorter and not on topic emails next time. So if you haven't heard your email yet, or I haven't replied to you, we'll probably get to it on next week's episode. Why don't you go ahead and hit the first one? These, of course, were sent to devgameclub@gmail.com.
Okay. Subject, Shenmue /Dreamcast. Well, you asked for it. From Guy Morgan. Dear Brett and Tim, I threatened to email in about the Dreamcast after hearing that you were going to play Shenmue, so here it is. Brett noted that he has trimmed this one down. He goes on. So that seems to be a good time to talk about Shenmue. I've recently replayed it on the Xbox and I'm considering becoming either a forklift truck driver or a recruiter for the Navy. What does that mean?
I wonder if that's for part 2. I don't know.
Maybe. Okay. I definitely have no interest in studying.
Oh, no, because he's looking for some sailors.
Oh, got it. Good one, Guy. I definitely have no interest in studying karate, though. I feel like I've had far too much time in the virtual dojo to appreciate any time in the real one. RPG elements relating to the fighting system were surprisingly deep, with moves becoming stronger, faster, or leaving Ryu less open to attack if mastered. Oh, interesting. I think my 15-year-old self must have got into more fights than so-called adult me, since I seem to remember mastering a lot of the moves, whereas on the more recent playthrough, I only managed to level up a few, mastering none. In a game where time is so important, it becomes obvious how much time I had then. The overall design of Shenmue being time-sensitive passed me by in the first playthrough. It's possible to lose the game by allowing too much time to pass. This is very generous, but it's still possible. As I wasn't aware of this in my first playthrough, I think I had much more contemplative and patient playthrough and was able to take in some of the side attractions such as the arcades, bar sports, the gacha machines. Now I'm frustrated that the gacha don't do anything, and you will end up with multiple copies of many of the figures, although you can trade them in Shenmue 2. What? Perhaps I've got too used to achievements. Agree there. There's a whole lot of content that is just plain missable too. Ryu's relationship with Nozomi is fleshed out by actually ringing Nozomi on the phone. Okay. Some fighting moves are obviously missing from Ryu's repertoire. A knowledge of fighting games will help out here, as they are all fairly usual button inputs. interesting or combinations, if you will. Son of a, gonna get you. There's an option to use the real weather from Yokosuka in 1986. For me, Shenmue feels very similar to an Elder Scrolls or Assassin's Creed. In hindsight, it feels like the game was looking to generate the feeling of what you guys call a systemic game, but did it by a huge amount of scripting, something akin to trying to open a padlock by brute force, trying every combination to get to the right one. No wonder it was expensive to make. Yeah, I think he puts that well. The controls are clunky, but not particularly clunky for the time. I remember the graphics being impressive for the time. The world, by today's standard, isn't very big, but it is very densely populated and is more of an impressionist painting of a world. By having so many NPCs moving about on a schedule, the areas have a real sense of place about them. The fight sequence near the end is fantastic. If you have experience, if you have experience of the fight system, but awful if you struggle with it. Okay.
Oh, hello.
Yep. No, good. Well put. The forklift racing is fun, but the collision detection is weird. Man, he's nailing all this stuff. There are small objects on corners, and any contact with any object will stop you dead. There's also an irony in playing as Ryu doing a fairly repetitive job in my leisure time, but still finding the fun in it. Overall, the game almost feels like the Dreamcast in microcosm. Moments of genius with some choices that might have been successful if they'd been implemented 5 years later. Thanks for spending the time to read this email and for making the podcast. Now, does anyone know where I can find some sailors? All of the best, and all the best, guys, and hope you have a good New Year and Christmas. Guy Morgan, it's good mail. Good mail. You really
he nails a lot of stuff that we actually talked about this time, and even about the forklift racing, something that I don't know if the collision specifically came up on cast, but I definitely brought it up before. I did not win the forklift races because I would constantly get just jammed into the collision by trying to take a corner inside somebody. This is bad.
Yeah. It didn't feel like a full, like a real driving model implementation. It just felt like they were using the physics they had and kind of plugging it in or something.
Yeah, I don't know. It feels like driving a golf cart or something like that, just something that doesn't have a ton of acceleration and has kind of weird turning. It doesn't feel horrible, but it also is a very strange choice of a thing to race. I mean, I think that we didn't talk about it in the show, but I think the real point of that racing section is to familiarize yourself with the environment, right? I mean, it's just another way to force you to know how you're going to drive. It would have been more on the nose, or maybe more appropriate to have those loops be better reflective of what you were going to do for that day, right? Yeah. So that it would feel like you were training, you were literally training for what you were going to do. But I don't know. We both made our quotas every day, so we got that going for us, I guess.
Yeah, some of the routes were very close to parts of the main race. There were sections that helped me for sure.
Although the first couple of days I did find myself getting lost and going the wrong direction for a little while because I didn't know one thing it didn't help with was where the warehouses were.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So
yeah.
But anyway, I mean but again, that was like being on a new job. So it's what it's like. I don't know. It's a very strange thing. Anyway, all right. I'll take the next one, which is thanks, Guy. This is from Lloyd Parker. It's Shenmue. He says, hello, I was the impressionable age of 13 when Shenmue released. The Dreamcast felt like a huge leap over the PS1 and N64, and Shenmue felt like a secondary leap over everything else on the platform. It looked better than Soul Calibur, a cutting-edge one-on-one fighter, but with an entire world to explore. How is that even possible? I remember asking myself. A mysterious-looking game set in Japan with incredible graphics and a protagonist that wears a really cool jacket? Sign me up. When I popped in the first disc, I could barely believe how cinematic and realistic it all felt. I was used to characters pantomiming around on pre-rendered backgrounds, big ugly dialogue boxes, and full-motion video. Here it was all real. Every single character spoke. They made subtle facial expressions and had things like individual fingers. Gasp. Transparent sunglasses, dreadlocks with physics. That's true. And the main character would naturally lift his foot onto a curb if he was standing in the right spot. Mind blown. Not only could you open drawers and examine individual objects, but you could go outside and walk around a town that seemed real. I could go on forever, but the point is, Shenmue was a revelation for me. As simple as the story was, the sad, lonely teenager out to take on the world struck a chord, even though I wasn't particularly sad or lonely as a teenager. Perhaps it was just typical teenage angst at work. I didn't care that the game was slow and ponderous, and over the past 18 years, in Shenmue's absence, I've searched for similar one-city block-style games. Games with a homely vibe, games that give you a small but densely detailed world to explore, locations to memorize, and characters to slowly build relationships with over time. I found glimpses of these things in other games, but I feel confident in saying there are no true Shenmue-likes out there, for better or worse. It strikes me as a series with indie spirit that is unfortunately next to impossible to make on an actual indie budget. Selfishly, I'd love for you to cover the whole series, as each game has a distinct flavor. At times, Shenmue 2 is just as slow as the original, but changes gears into what feels like a progenitor to the modern AAA blockbuster. Shenmue 3 takes a deep dive into interlinking systems and the world's economy, offering the player many more ways to approach the game. I don't think they had the budget to deliver the same character-driven story as previous games. Regardless of what you cover in the future, I will be listening. Thanks for the great podcast, Lloyd. And apologies for the absurdly lengthy email. He says he's the Yu Suzuki of emailers, which I guess means this is only 40% of what he wants to say.
He ended on a cliffhanger, and there's more to say as well.
That's right.
Yeah, I think both of these mails actually are doing a better job than I think we did at putting it in its time. I think, I think we didn't talk a lot about that, and we were critical of things, but you definitely, I think they're making really good points about when the game came out and what was out there up to this point, and that really, it's something we often try to do for the podcast, but it's very difficult to do for every game we play if we didn't have a personal connection to it. So I'm glad that they're mentioning it, because of its time, it definitely can see the revelatory nature. Yeah,
and in particular, I feel like the Dreamcast, Sega put a big push behind this game and the sort of realistic graphics and all of those things, but it came late enough in the cycle that I think Sony had already stolen their thunder. Sony really, we didn't talk a lot about this, but the PS2 so dominated, that people were basically waiting for the PS2 to come out, at least here in the States. And a lot of that on the basis of demos that they claimed were real time and whatever that looked amazing. They had done some scene from Final Fantasy VIII with them dancing, with I think Squall and Rinoa dancing, and said they were done in real time and they looked amazing. They were the pre-rendered cutscenes in on the PS1 game, and I remember everybody really looking forward to it, and how the Dreamcast sort of became an also ran right out of the gate. It just ended up being the wrong strategy to be the first to market, because Sony was smarter in how it marketed their machine. So it was a weird time. And then, of course, another challenger entered the fray at that point with the original Xbox not too long after as well. So it became a very crowded console market, targeting targeting what they target, the area where Microsoft and Sony compete today. Nintendo has always kind of done their own thing. But it was a super interesting system, and yes, it was way ahead of anything else when it released. So it's and unfortunately they just got beat out by the promises that other console manufacturers were making. But a lot of what he has to say are things that are new here, like not having mitten hands is one of them for sure.
Yeah.
So, that's a good call out. That's one thing I definitely go, oh yeah, that's definitely true. Like that stands out. Not having sort of fixed position mitten hands is definitely a thing, because you can afford more than 16 polygons on it or what have you. So,
well, and I think Tom's dreadlocks and his glasses, I think he was jokingly mentioning those too, but specifically I made note of his glasses, because not only are they transparent, but there's a color gradient on the transparency that's pretty good for the time. And I mean, there's other things we can say about Tom as a character generally, so we don't need to talk about it, but technically, at least, there's some amazing stuff going on there, especially with his hair. I
will also say, I love the fact that Tom has a t-shirt which has a picture of, well, it's not a picture, but it has an illustration of him on it, and it says Tom's Hot Dogs on it. It's amazing to me. Everybody has their own. Yeah, he has a shirt that says Tom's Hot Dog on it. It's so good.
Custom, yeah. I mean, well, and
a custom texture just for that, which is also ahead of the game, right? I mean, nobody else is doing that. It's years before Carmack, I guess, is going to say, well, every wall is going to have its own texture or whatever. He doesn't talk about that until Doom 3, but they're already doing so much more with texture in this one, in this game and on this system generally. So, well, and
Goro was also one of my favorites as a just crazy character, and his shirt said something like bad or something. It was super hilarious.
Yeah, he has his own thing, right? And also he's got his own walk as well.
Oh my gosh, it's amazing.
That walk. Yeah, he should get a grant. So it's definitely I mean, it does a lot of stuff. It does, the way it's chosen to be so specific about so many things is really interesting. Yeah, it's an interesting game, and there's a lot of the things that feel unnatural and stilted are those are the things that happen when you're doing something for the first time. Like you don't know how to write these dialogue things so that they'll fit in, because they could happen at any time. So you don't have the budget to make it, any number of different ways you might introduce those things, and so you get sort of the repeated. I want to ask you about sailors or whatever it is. Have you seen any foreigners? Because you don't have maybe the budget. You're looking at a CD basically. He mentions disc 1 versus disc 2, so you're talking at the time, 600 megabytes or something per disc, and audio tends to eat up at the time, especially ate up a lot of that. So anyway, I could natter on, but thanks for that, Lloyd. You have one more, and then I think. I think that's it for the Shenmue discussion, at least this week.
Okay, Shenmue thoughts from Daniel Laux. I believe we got that right this time. I think he wrote in before, or maybe he's just And I probably butchered it.
Yeah, I think he has, and he actually says at the beginning the ow is in shout. So,
yes. Brett and Tim, firstly, thank you for the delightful podcast. Even for games I'm not familiar, I enjoy your insights into design and play. With Shenmue, I am familiar, and I did take an exception to one comment Brett made, specifically when the two of you were having trouble remembering the town name Dobuita. Brett dismissed seeking the proper pronunciation spelling with "I don't care." I believe this actually.
I'll come back to
it. I believe this actually contravenes Yu Suzuki's intent of Shenmue. You, as a player, are supposed to care what the names of the people and places are. Modern open world games use places as treasure chests to be looted and farmed, while places like Sakuragoka and Dabuita are living spaces to call home. The Gachapon, right? Gotcha, yeah. Right. Gachapon toys are really the only finite collectible, and conversations, as you mentioned, aren't going to advance the story in a strictly linear fashion. This is a game where you're supposed to take the time to do nothing, and dismissing that intent by dismissing those details. I see. I know what Brett's going to say on this one. loses what made Shenmue revolutionary and what continues to make the series unique today among its AAA peers. You were right that this is somewhat more akin to Gone Home, but I'd suggest that it's as much Proteus, where the environment has no defined narrative conclusion to express. Advancement of the story really happens through the people and time in Shenmue. I played the game near release on Dreamcast and lived in Ryo's world with him at the time. I grew up with an interest in Japan and Japanese culture, and as a young adult, Shenmue was as close to visiting the country and culture as I could afford. It sounds silly, but I generally felt as if I had been there. That feeling was solidified 10 years later when I went to Japan for a business trip and instantly felt as if I'd been there already. From the narrow fluorescent street lights flickering to life at dusk to the ubiquitous drink vending machines, my first real visit to Japan felt like my second or third. Maybe in a way, this is the difference between your experience and mine. Most assuredly, your lives have been more than I had when I was in my mid-20s, so you weren't experiencing Japan for the first time, but I'd still suggest playing it with the intent of achieving continual progress as you're doing for the sake of the podcast. It is not the intent of the game's design. This game is structured closer to Animal Crossing or WoW than Assassin's Creed, or even what I know of Skyrim or The Witcher 3. It's been great listening to this first episode of Shenmue, and I'll admit the forklift races kept me from finishing the game so many years ago. I'm definitely overdue to go back and complete it, so your playthrough is great motivation to return. Cheers, Daniel Laux.
Yes. So in my defense, although I don't care what the towns are called, I do nonetheless feel immersed in them.
Yeah.
You know, it's really just literally the names that don't stick with me, like Sakura Gaoka. I mean, by the end of the game, I remembered what all these places are called and things like that. But it's not something that ever sticks with me. Place names are just, I know my way around the areas of GTA 3 as well. I don't know what any of the sections are called, but they're just kind of random city neighborhood names. And they just don't stick with me. So it's not, I'm dismissive more because it's just not it's not a thing that I retain well about games, even though, like we talked about this episode in particular, like I knew exactly where to go for different things. And I definitely, I had a sense of how places were laid out. I mean, when I discovered that there were two different ways to get into Dobuita from Sakura Gaoka, mm-hmm. That was a really interesting moment of like, oh, this is my way to get down closer to the bus stop faster.
Yeah.
And I often went that way because just naturally as you go through town, you kind of end up on that end and then you're like, well, I can circle back this way. But also just when I figured out, oh, there's two entrances into sort of the entertainment district, if you'd call it that, was another moment of sort of like, oh, I see how this all fits together kind of moments. And I think that's really great. The names themselves just don't, like, I don't remember what any of the cocktail bars are called or anything like that either. It just doesn't stick. It's too much alphabet soup for me. Maybe if I had actually if I knew these names of places beforehand, I might find that easier to remember. I just don't. I do get really situated in the locations. I just have a hard time with the names.
Yeah,
I guess that's what I'm trying to say.
And I think it depends. Well, yeah, I mean, we talk about this on the podcast a lot. You're not a lore guy. You're not a fiction guy. The details like that are not really kind of something that your brain focuses on.
Yeah, but I love landmarks.
But you love, yeah. I think it depends on the player. I think I totally agree with him that that's the game's design. That's the intent with the design. And I think that he also mentioned in the mail that we talk about from time to time, one disadvantage we have with the way that we structure the podcast is that we do have a goal and an intent with playing the games from a timing perspective. And so I think we do, in some of the cases of the games that we played that were definitely of this kind or a little more elaborate in certain ways, we don't get to really dig as deep into them as they were intended to because of the structure of the podcast. So I can totally see, and like I mentioned, a couple of those stories of appreciating some of those smaller moments that were non-critical path that I just sort of happened to get into, doing the training more than I thought I was going to, spending time in the arcade or whatever. I could totally see myself spending, I can see the game really does achieve that goal. And that is a very rare thing, like we said, that nobody does anymore. And that's why I'm actually kind of excited about getting back to Death Stranding, because I'm hoping that there's more, more of that sort of stuff going on. There won't be like Shenmue, but I'm kind of excited about the mundane aspects of things like that. But I think it's a testament to the fact that people have been writing in and have felt like they lived in the world. And if you are, and Daniel said himself, like he didn't get to finish the very last portion of the game because of the forklift section, but he still left an impression on him. And he probably knows the world better than anybody, even though he didn't. So that's amazing that they achieved that, right? That he experienced what they wanted him to.
Yeah, and another thing that I spent a lot of time doing that we didn't really talk about on the podcast, but people who watch my stream know, I spent a ton of time in the slots parlor or the
oh yeah, I did almost none.
Yeah, I mean, I went in there, I spent like 1,000 yen or something to get a huge number of tokens or whatever, and just went and did the 1 yen machine for a bunch of time till I won enough that I felt like I could move up to the 5, and like I had a whole strategy. I was basically doing it in those times when I was waiting for, this location doesn't open until later or whatever, but that's what I would go and do. And I had someone in there say, don't go, you're supposed to be looking for your father's killer. Don't go throwing your life away on the slot machines, and whatever. And I mean, so that stuff is there, and that, I found that oddly compelling. It was a good time for me to just kind of like repetitively hit the buttons and kind of mentally keep track of where I had started with my money and where I was ending. I guess they were tokens at that point. Yeah, I mean, we didn't go into that on the cast, but it is something I spent a lot of time doing. And yeah, you spent time in the shops and things like that, and getting gacha and what have you. So yeah, I mean, it's there and it's rewarding. But I'm not likely to latch on to the names of things. So it's a personal failing, I guess. We'll just have to live with that. But anyway, thank you.
Daniel.
Right? It's Daniel.
Yes, Daniel. Yeah.
Okay. Well, that is it then for Shenmue. Thanks for those emails to devgameclub@gmail.com. I think we already said, did we say at the end of the last podcast what we're doing next? I think we did.
I think we did. I don't remember for sure.
Okay, well, in any case, we, as those of you who have noticed, we have a new intro music and outro music on the cast. You might even be hearing the outro beneath all of this. We'll see what I do in post tomorrow. From Kirk Hamilton, and he's a friend of mine. Our listener Aaron Evers gave us a gift this year of new music, new theme music for the cast. So we're going to talk with Kirk about the process of composing that music, as well as some of his sort of favorite classic games music for next week's. And I guess we'll talk about what game we play next after that. So you will have a break this next week.
We're going to sneak in probably a Warcraft episode, right? In between two.
Oh, right. And yes, we have talked about doing a Warcraft episode as well. So hopefully
check in, as we'll probably be doing those for quite a while, but we'll do a check-in episode. And we're hoping to at least play Dead Mines as a dungeon, as a group, because we haven't done that yet in the game. So
we should be able to do that in the next couple of weeks or in the next 10 days before we record the next one, I guess. Hopefully we'll get a chance. And you can find us on Twitter at DevGameClub, where we put a call out to see if there are any other adventurers who wanted to join us with that. Hit us up if you would like to. We've been playing WoW Classic, and kind of jumping in and checking in on that is a plan for us going forward this year. Yeah, so that's us on Twitter. You can find the show at devgameclub.com. You can find my co-host on Twitter
at Tim Longo Jr. with the JR at the end.
And I've been streaming Persona 5 weeknights, and I guess now weekends while we wait for our next game at twitch.tv/BrettDouville. Thanks so much for joining us. We will see you on the mean streets of Doguita, and good night.
Good night.